It's Tuesday, May 19th, 2020. Welcome to the Collaborative Talk with Dr. Jack Becker, whom I will introduce in a moment. He's the Joslyn Museum Executive Director and CEO. But first, let me say a few words about art. As many of you know, I started Slow Art Day 10 years ago to build a movement that helps more people learn to look at and love art. The question is why? Why did I do that? Several reasons. The majority of Americans do not visit an art museum in a given year. And those that do tend to quickly look at many pieces of art and thereby often don't actually see or really see anything and instead become exhausted. And many don't return after that experience. So we wanted to change that. And I'm happy to say that there have been 1,500 Slow Art Day events around the world produced by museums from the Louvre to MoMA in New York to the Tate Modern to, in fact, the Joslyn Museum in Omaha. Art in and of itself is a profoundly human and creative act. There's no justification needed, in my opinion, to look at and love art. But we also discovered that slow looking allows participants to do something that is otherwise extremely hard to do, which is to have the felt experience of seeing through biases and blind spots. We had a world famous behavioral economist, Dan Ariely, speak a few weeks ago, as many of you know. Ariely will tell you that it's very hard to do anything practical with your blind spots, including even recognizing them when they occur. Slow looking at art does that. And so in addition to the fundamentally human and creative reasons to look at art, there's also a leadership story about how art provides one of the very few contexts where we can see our biases in action. Jack Becker knows this better than most and has in fact led a complete revisioning of the museum in Omaha, which is one of the reasons we invited him. The Joslyn is the largest museum in Nebraska and features diverse collections from antiquity to the present, with strengths in European painting, American art, art of the American West, and also contemporary art. Whenever we go to Omaha for the annual Berkshire Hathaway meeting, we take time to visit the Joslyn. And this year, we were going to bring a whole group of you in person to meet Jack Becker and to directly experience the museum and the important work they're doing. This webinar obviously stands in place of that in-person experience, but can never replace what it means to actually be in a museum, and can't wait for the museums, including the Joslyn, to reopen. I'll note a few more things about Becker. Since his arrival in 2010, the museum has defined and achieved several new projects and goals that have had a big impact, including really important free admission. Given that not enough Americans go to museums in the first place, and certainly not enough Americans at lower socioeconomic levels, free admission makes a big difference. And they secured funding to provide year-round free admission, which has grown attendance, not surprisingly, by 50%, 50. He also started, he and his team, the new Contemporary Artist Project Gallery, an exhibition series which brings new perspectives on contemporary art to Nebraska, which is cool. A 1,500 square foot hands-on discovery gallery, Artworks, a place, it's called Artworks, a place for curiosity, that now welcomes over 45,000 visitors annually, and that's really, really a great element. And also they have launched a major expansion to build a new building and increase areas devoted to both educational offerings and to public engagement. With that introduction, Jack, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk to us about how the museum has prioritized diversity, ranging from special exhibitions to diversifying the permanent collection, including acquiring works of art from artists like Kehinde Wiley, Mickalene Thomas, and others. And I think you're also going to give us a short video, kind of behind the scenes tour of the museum's evolution of access. So you're going to speak for 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll have Q&A. For all of you with us live while he's talking, please share your thoughts or questions in the chat, which I'll monitor. Jack, thanks for being here today. This is a tough time for museums with a coronavirus lockdown. How are you? And what can you tell us about the revolution you've been leading there to redefine the museum in the 21st century?
Thanks for that great introduction, Phil. And it is great to meet you all virtually. I was really looking forward to having a chance to walk through the museum as a group and possibly having a conversation over a glass of wine or something, which is always a more spirited conversation, but we'll make do with the virtual.
Yeah.
And at the end of my talk, I'm going to just give a couple quick thoughts about the impact of COVID-19 upon an institution like us and how we are thinking about it. And, and I'm sure we're all thinking about it in our daily and our personal and our professional lives. But I'm gonna share my screen here in a moment. I'm gonna just kind of a quick overview of the history of the museum and some of the ways that we are trying to build community through public programming, and talk a little bit about some collection initiatives, and very informal. I'll probably move quickly. So, don't hesitate to jump in. So let me see. I am a little bit of Luddite with technology.
So when you hit share, you want to make sure there you go. Perfect.
Look at that. We're going to back up. So there is the Joslyn itself. It is two buildings, and I'll quickly go to the history. On the left is a 1931 Art Deco building. It was opened and paid for by a woman named Sarah Joslyn as a memorial to her late husband. We think they were the wealthiest family in the state of Nebraska at the time, and I always describe them as the CNN of their day. They owned all the daily inserts for newspapers. They owned the lumber yards, the production presses, and everything. And they made a rather large fortune that resulted in the Joslyn Memorial. 1994, Norman Foster, a well-known British architect, did the addition, his first American project. Sarah opened the museum in 1931. It was free at that time. She included a concert hall that seats 1,000 people surrounded by galleries. She actually included classrooms, which was very unheard of in the 1930s.
1930s, wow.
Yeah. So, and we opened in the height of the Depression, if you think about it. So that's just a quick overview. Here's a great shot of the courtyard, the 1931 Art Deco building. As Phil mentioned, our collections, go from sort of antiquity up to the present day. We're not encyclopedic, but we try to be comprehensive. I came to Omaha just over 10 years ago in 2010, at a time when the institution had some challenges with regard to budget and governance and programming and attendance, et cetera. But we won't talk about all those things, but over the last several years, we as a team, staff and board and community have made some great progress in engaging the community. One of the things, was intent upon, this is very sort of a family-centric town, and how do you engage families to go to the art museum who feel like, well, it's not always a place for me to go. I've got these young kids, and, it's not always the best thing. So we said, well, that's not really true. And with some local funding, we created took over a storage space and created Artworks, which is a hands-on space that is really sort of incredible, where you can do traditional drawing or painting as you see here. There are areas where you can make an animated video. There's a computer modulated program with a giant screen on the floor where you can pour paint and pretend you're Jackson Pollock as if you're creating a painting. This has been a really great way to engage with audiences from across the institution. We also know it's the kind of space where afterwards kids say to their parents, let's go to the galleries, which is really what we are looking for all the time. Phil mentioned free admission. The museum started charging admission in the 1960s. When I came to Omaha, the museum was free on Saturday mornings between 10 and 12, and 46% of our attendance was on Saturday mornings between 10 and 12. So we went to be universally free again, which has really changed the demographics of who we are and how people use the museum. Not only free admission, but programming. What are the ways that people connect to the museum? Whether it's tours for adults, school programs such as this, where we do a lot of programming. And we work with tons of community groups. There's an important Tri-Faith initiative here in Omaha, where my Temple Israel has a new temple, which is next to a mosque and next to a Christian church. We work with lots of universities. We host World Refugee Day, which is the largest gathering of refugees in the city of Omaha. We initiated a teen mentoring program called the Camp Bellows Studio, where kids from across 30 different high schools work with artists after school on art projects. These are the kids who often are not on the football team and not exactly doing well academically, but, it's an incredible program with great success rates. We initiated programs around stroller tours for, young parents with babies and strollers. It's as much about the parents as it is about the kids. And then new programs at the end of life, patients dealing with memory loss. Even things such as yoga, outside of the garden. But these are all the different ways we try to think about connecting. Phil mentioned contemporary art as well. There was a huge cry for the institution to do more with contemporary art when I arrived. We were able to hire a curator of contemporary art, start some new exhibition program, and really try to bring contemporary art into the museum. This is one of my kind of favorite, sort of one of our stock images of I'm assuming a father and a daughter standing in front of our great Jackson Pollock from 1948. This is a gift from Peggy Guggenheim in 1949, but a terrific painting.
She was Joslyn in 49, that's cool, yeah.
Yeah, we worked with an art advisor that also had known Peggy. This was a painting that I know she paid $700 for at that time. Considered one of the most important Pollocks because he's painting it as a canvas, and it's one of the very first canvases he put on the floor and he dripped over. So it's kind of this important transitional work.
Yeah.
But we see ourselves as a place where everyone can come together, where you meet with a stranger or a family member or a friend, this notion of creative capital. How can you unleash your own creative capital in a place that's all about creativity? Important of encountering diverse points of view, engage with the past, the present, and the future. And with all of this, there's been sort of this desire to also begin to think about the diversity around collections. At the core of an art museum, or what do you have on the wall? And not surprisingly, when you think of the history of American art museums, you sort of think of a narrative that is very much a white, and it's male, and it's European centric. And that is an important narrative in this nation's history, but it's not the only narrative that defines America or defines our present or our future. And so we want to expand that idea of the narrative, that there's more than one narrative. And it's important to be able to see yourself at the museum or at any cultural institution. If someone walks in and cannot see themselves or find themselves at this institution or within this collection, well, then you're invisible, and this is not an institution for you. So we're very much wanting to sort of change those global perceptions. And collections are one way to do that. So this is just a sort of if we were walking together, we would be walking through the Memorial Building. This is a European gallery of 16th and 17th century painting, Claude Lorraine, Italian things. There's a great Rembrandt that I don't have time to go into, but when I arrived here in 2010, we had a Rembrandt that had been in storage for 20 years. We weren't sure it was a Rembrandt. And lo and behold, after a 2-year research project, it came back as a Rembrandt, a big article in the Wall Street Journal, et cetera.
Wow.
You see that picture there on the right.
Yeah.
But the painting I want to talk about is this one here. And you see a close-up here. This is, so when I got here, the European galleries, there was, there were no female voices in this gallery, in any of these galleries. And how does one change that narrative? So we made a couple purchases, brought a couple things out of storage. And now there are 4 or 5 works by female artists. And this was a painting we bought this last year by a woman named Maria van OOsterwyck. It's from 1685. She was an important 17th century Dutch painter of the 17th century. She painted for King Louis XIV of France and for King William of England, and was a well-known still life painter. But how great to have a picture like this come into the museum that's a great still life that complements the Rembrandt, but at the same time gives voice to why are there so few female artists in the 17th century? And it's an interesting conversation point for school tours and others.
Yeah.
Also around contemporary art. I mean, we had never had an exhibition program that, hit at issues of diversity very hard. There was a well-known exhibition called 30 Americans, a contemporary show that looked at 2 generations of recent African-American artists. that traveled to many, many museums from a private collection called the Rubels in Miami. We went after that exhibition and brought it to Omaha. Here is a view of that exhibition. It was incredibly well attended. There was a ton of programming around it. 18 months before the exhibition opened, we formed a community advisory group of leaders in the African American community who worked with us, who suggested programming. It was an exhibition that had some aggressive content. There was a work called Duck Duck Noose that was a series of nooses dealing with lynching. It was a work that created a bit of controversy in Omaha, made the local news, made the local paper, but it sparked a really great dialogue within the community. And we didn't shy away from those conversations. We sometimes say that museums are safe places for unsafe or difficult subjects. And we want to be that kind of place for those conversations. But we also wanted, an exhibition is great, but it's only for 3 months. What happens after that? And again, that notion, I want to be able to see myself in the museum. And with support of a local foundation and others, we made a number of acquisitions around contemporary African American art, which has been sort of transformative. And in this next video, which is not great, I'll dim the sound, but you'll see some of these things, and then I'll talk along the way and afterwards about a couple things here. So I'm going to play this video. What?
Did we lose the video?
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right, I just want to pause for 1 second. This is just a chance to talk about this picture right here. We mentioned the new contemporary art space, and this was a work we acquired from one of those exhibitions. Her woman's name is Have Karman. She was featured a few years ago. She was born in Baghdad. She was raised in Sweden. She lives in Los Angeles. She's probably all of like 40. And she's gotten tons of attention, and she does this very interesting work around the idea of the female body, about what it means to be an immigrant, what it means East versus West. And then she cuts into these canvases, she cuts into these human bodies, and they're really kind of beautiful. And she gave perhaps one of the best public lectures I had seen. It was right before the 2016 presidential election, and she gave a whole sort of story about immigration. She hired 4 local actresses of different ethnic backgrounds to do a reading and talk about immigration. It was a standing room only presentation, but incredibly powerful. And if I can, I'll go. And this is a work by a woman named Carol Walker. Probably many may have heard of Carol Walker, a well-known, incredibly well-known contemporary artist. This is a series of prints she made based on a drawing she did when she was at the American Academy in Rome. It is sort of this notion of sort of resurrection. A figure in the middle is being saved by the figures on the either side of her from a shipwreck. And this notion of the resurrection that African Americans deal with on a daily basis is very much some of the ideas behind works like this. We mentioned Kehinde Wiley, who, again, best known most recently for his portrait of Barack Obama. This is a painting from 2018. These are giant canvases. I think this is 12 feet long. He also is an artist who references a European tradition. He inserts African Americans in the guise of European portrait painting to kind of invert the narrative. This is from a body of work that he did in St. Louis. He went to St. Louis and he spent time in Ferguson. Where the shooting of Michael Brown took place in 2014. He went and found models in Ferguson, brought them to the museum, and then posed them in poses and paintings that he found in the European collection. This was a major acquisition for us. It's also resulted in sort of a relationship with Kehinde Wiley, who was scheduled to come to Omaha, this spring, where he hopes to work on a project here, a series of pictures, portraits around the immigrant community from Sudan. That project is obviously on hold, but we hope that Kehinde will come back to Omaha and do an exhibition and a project here. So these things sort of, you never know what will happen.
Yeah.
There's also a great painting by Mickalene Thomas, who is, so a celebration of Black femininity. She's empowered strong images of African-American women, which are rare in the history of art, very much inspired by her mother. And then these are pictures that are almost sort of adored with glitter and rhinestones. And this has been a great acquisition for the museum. And people have said to me, I never thought this was possible. I never thought I would walk into a gallery like this at the Joslyn and see these works. That does change the narrative. It changes the perception of the institution, and it sort of moves us forward. Another initiative that is just beginning is around Native American collections. We are here situated in the High Plains, surrounded by a number of tribal communities. We've had collections of Native American art, mostly in storage, and no one sort of in charge of them. Through the generous support of the Mellon Foundation in New York, we've had funding for a curator of Native American art who just started this fall, a young woman who completed her Ph.D. in part at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. And she's all about community engagement, about working with tribal communities and building a dialogue, and for the museum to be a platform that connects to communities and back to the museum. So more to come on this front, I think, in the years ahead. There is the museum at night. As I think about diversity, we've made some progress. I feel like we're woefully behind. Our staff is still not as diverse as it should be, nor is our board, but there is a real commitment to the board of, making sure that we represent the diversity of the Omaha community. I thought I might just sort of jump right into, that's my quickest overall. It would have been more fun to do this in the galleries. Yeah. But I thought I'd take a moment maybe and talk about Joslyn since March 16th, which is sort of when the world shut down.
And by the way, we have a couple of good questions that we'll get to in a moment. And I just want to remind people, if you have questions, put them in the chat. But go ahead, Jack.
We've been closed since mid-March. We are articulating sort of what we have to do to reopen and what that looks like, without a clear date. Hopefully a scaled back experience late summer. We are very much, be the touch-free museum experience. So things like artworks and classes and school tours, those things won't happen, we think, for considerable time. Obviously, I have a financial background as well as an art background, and we really sort of jumped into the finances early on. We secured a PPP loan from the SBA. And even with those measures, I project a 25% decline in revenue this year. I expect to have a 25, plus decline in revenue next year. So we were able to do some things by mitigating the budget, by canceling summer exhibitions, programming, these kinds of things. We also, made some staffing decisions as well. And this is a difficult time for museums. Simple things like art cannot be moved right now. So whether it's got to be moved across the country or from Europe, we have paintings right now in Italy, in Germany, in San Diego, and in Denver, and nothing can move. Yeah. Our connection with schools is going to be changed for some time. No weddings, no earned income. We have a volunteer base that is quite elderly, and we think that we're not so sure how that's going to work in the future. We've made great strides in trying to bring a virtual digital museum, but it really can't replace the museum experience and that connection that one has with works of art. Next year's our 90th anniversary. It's interesting that we are a museum that opened in the Great Depression. Yeah. And we'll probably be celebrating our 90th anniversary under different times next year. But we know that we will get through this. And we really aspire to be an institution that is not just about art on the wall, but that's community focused, that meets the needs of this community today and tomorrow, and that we really want to kind of help build a better quality of life here in Omaha. Yeah. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, first of all, Jack, for taking time with us today. Thank you for that overview. It's just great to spend some time looking at some art and being in the museum, even if we're not actually there. I quite miss museums, and we're poorer as a country for it right now.
Yes.
There's a lot of different questions here, and I want to start with one from Ahmed El Shinaway, who asked, he appreciates the overview and work on diversity. What's been successful for you to promote inclusion, and how do you measure if your inclusion efforts are successful?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I feel like for us, it's just trying to make as many people who can participate. I mean, I feel like museums, it's not just good enough to open the door. You have to go out and invite people to come in and say that this institution matters to all of you. And to go to you know, example like the community advisory group, it was like, help us plan programming, help us think about what you want your community's museum to do. How we measure that, I don't know. I think we measure that, over time, over people's perception, it's sort of soft metrics versus hard metrics. I will say that, anecdotally, I have someone that I know well who runs a nonprofit here in Omaha who said, I've been going to the Joslyn for a number of years. I go, but he said, I never felt like it was my museum until recently.
Yeah.
So it's not a perfect story, but we make progress every day.
Yeah. I wrote a book about customer experience of 5 or 6 years ago, and one of the stories was about Prospect Park in Brooklyn, where I was on the board. And one of the things that we discovered through going out and doing observational studies in the park is that most people did not come into the center of the park, where there had been a lot of money spent to renovate the old boathouse, the first Urban Audubon Center, all this stuff. And what we did to change that was, first we had the board members themselves actually go out into the park and discover that, see for themselves that people were not using it, and especially the African-American community, the Hasidic community, a lot of the communities that we have in Brooklyn. And having that personal board, going out and seeing, and it kind of broke through their own blind spots. And then we did just what you're talking about. You had to do the community outreach, and there's more than 100 languages spoken in Brooklyn. And how do you interact with each of those organizations and communities? And how do you, what we certainly discovered is something you've learned at the museum, which is if someone didn't see someone who looked like them walking into the center part of the park, they didn't go themselves. Really.
And as we think, and we are in the midst of an early stage of a design process for a new wing to the museum, and our buildings are wonderful and handsome, but they're giant sort of pink fortresses meant to keep the art safe and the people out. And how do we architecturally and from a design perspective and from a site perspective create an institution that is much more transparent, that is much more welcoming, that is much more inviting, so it happens outside of the property as much as it happens when you get there?
Yeah, so that actually is there's a couple of questions. So Matt Johnson at Target is asking, are there opportunities to package and extend outward the engagement programs in art and yoga and other initiatives, not only in the Omaha community, but he's asking to other art communities across the US and around the world?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I feel like we talk about this as a senior team all the time, like what have we learned from the digital experience? And we have a program on Friday mornings. I should know what it's called. It's sort of a hands-on program for families with kids. And we're finding out, like, I think 20% of the people who participate in this online learning program are not even anywhere near Nebraska. But yeah, and I think that I feel privileged that I work in a field where my colleagues are in different cities and we don't feel in competition with one another and we kind of share ideas, but there's got to be a way in which we can translate and do some of these things that we're trying to do now online. Our curators have been putting together art history lectures for people, and we know that not everyone, it's not just people from Omaha who are signing up.
Right.
How can we, create this digital, and how will we carry this with us in post-COVID, because it will stay.
Post-COVID, exactly. You know, one of the silver linings of COVID, and you know, when we started SLO Art Day, although we were internet professionals, we were committed that this was not an online experience. We wanted people to go into the museums.
Yeah.
We would use the online to market and promote, but we wanted people to go into museums. Of course, this year that couldn't happen. And one of the silver linings is that museums all over the world did such creative, slow-looking exercises. And now everyone in the world can actually participate in those exercises, right? And we're publishing the instructions for each of what these museums did all over the world on our website. And we're also personally able to experience it because we couldn't go to Portugal and to Africa, you know, and be all over the world before. So there are some silver linings, that's right. And how are we gonna maintain this post-COVID? But still, really, we want people to come into and with the, you know, the experience that because it is just, and this, you know, I feel strongly, I know you agree, Jack, that the art that hangs on the walls of museums all over the world is owned by all of us. This is humanity's treasure. It is owned by all of us, and all of us need to feel that ownership.
And we always talk about how we build a collection that represents this community, that's for this community, and that is very much the community's collection. No one curator, no one director.
Yeah, yeah. So a couple of more tactical questions coming from some of our SLO Art Day hosts. So Hetty, who's one of the early SLO Art Day hosts, she's an artist in California in Laguna Beach, a longtime artist, part of the both Sawdust Festival and the Laguna Beach Masters Festival, if you know out there.
Yep, I do know.
Yeah. And she says, she has several questions. One, she noticed there weren't many long descriptive labels on the works. At least from the photographs or videos that we saw. And she said she has mixed feelings about this, as often I feel that words can supplant the visual. However, providing context is vital. You know, there's a long debate about whether there should be text or no text, how long. And she just wanted to know your thoughts on.
So it's a great thought. So we, like I always chide my curators that I say, if I am not going to read that first sentence, I'm not going to read the second sentence, because I don't read, like I am a terrible reader when I go to museums. But so we have this balancing act between like the big idea, like if I walk into an exhibition, can I read the first 2 or 3 sentences and get it? If I read nothing else. So we have the, one thing we have done is we've increased the font size of our labels, because there's nothing worse than needing glasses and being able to read that.
Yeah.
We also, with our special exhibitions, we do a cell phone tour. We pick 10 to 12 objects. And it can either be a curator, or like for 30 Americans, it was people from the African-American community in Omaha who responded to works. And we do those tours in English and in Spanish. And that model of having something that you can listen to, we think is also as important as having something to read. And then we're also just doing a couple of publications, a new handbook of a European collection, so that, you know, that's a different opportunity to learn more about something that you've seen that day when you're sitting at home with a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. So I think we always are debating about what is the best structure for labels. I also really believe that sometimes even though I pass curator, I don't really always want to hear from the academic. So we did a project once called Community Choices. We invited 100 community members, you know, a coach, a football player, everybody to come in and pick their favorite object and write their own label about what they like.
That's fantastic.
And then you can have like it's a different space in your head to look at this work of art through someone else's eyes.
Yeah, yeah.
Hopefully that helps answers the question.
It does, and we could certainly, I'll say one more thing, which is that 2 redesigns ago, when not the recent MoMA redesign in New York, but the one before that, 15 years ago or so, I got to go before they put the labels up. And that was just such a wonderful experience to the museum, to just look at and be with the art without worrying about the cognitive experience, have primarily and exclusively a visual experience. Although I do like labels, I find that sadly most people spend half the time they spend with the painting with a label, and combined that's like 15 seconds. So it's not enough. I
just want to say quickly, a label, a well-written label, it should force you to look back at the work of art and see something that you didn't see. It shouldn't just be the name of the artist and their personal story. As important that is, it should really force you to look back at that work.
Yeah, good point. Bring you back to the art. So Origa Martin, one of our members, actually from New Zealand, I'm happy to say, and they have handled this much better than many other countries around the world.
Indeed.
Origa is asking, how do you measure creative capital as a key result in the community?
I don't know if I can do that, but I always advocate, part of why I think art museums matter is that basically we're 3,000 to 5,000 years of creativity, and that we want people who are creative to solve the problems of today and tomorrow, and that and to have moments even within a museum where you can be creative yourself, such as in artworks, so that you too can dabble or create and know that you can be creative, and that creativity can manifest itself in so many different ways, but that museums should be seen as this, and the way that implicit in that creativity too are the different points of view and the diversity of expression and ideas, and that whole, I mean, I don't know how you measure it, but like it's part of who we are in our DNA. I believe that.
You know, Steve Jobs, there's a lot to say about him, positive and negative, and he always resisted the question of how do you measure the creative, but he did say, you've got to go and develop your ability to look at and love art. And he thought it was fundamental to the success of Apple. I tend to not lead with that because, you know, I want people to think this is worth doing, not just because some famous person said so, but because art is so fundamentally human. But
even like one program that we haven't done yet, but I know about is when museums work with medical students who are in the residency to come in and look at works of art, and look at portraits especially, and discern human relationships to practice their bedside manner. Like, can you observe this person and think about what they're really going to say or not really saying by their expression? That kind of looking. We live in a very visual world, so how can looking help us understand information as well?
Yeah, and that's very core to us at SLO Art Day, and we love the programs that are working with medical students and building that empathy. It's had a big impact from the research that's been published. It's very cool. All right, what else? Just a couple of things. You said this, but how do you pay for increased programming with no admission revenue? You got a funding source, I think, right?
A funding source. And, you know, we are also a museum where, you know, admissions and membership are usually less than 10% of revenue for an institution like us. Now, if I was at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, where perhaps 60% of my attendance is from people from foreign countries, and another 20% from outside of the metro area, the gate is really important in places like New York and Paris and those sort of big cities with an international and a huge travel. For a place like Omaha, raising money for free admission and providing access to the museum is really not been easy, but it is relatively easy. And so there are other ways for us. I think that best art museums have the best endowments. I think endowment is the key revenue source, and then annual giving. But earned income opportunities in an art museum like ours are not great. Are more limited.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so let's see, what other questions do we have that I haven't addressed yet? So, would you consider audio tours and small group discussion topics to extend to people who cannot attend in person? So I guess online.
Yeah.
Right.
We are actually trying to roll out some conversations with curators over the course of this summer, where they can pick a topic and invite other people to participate, and then have questions and kind of continue the dialogue, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. What, so some of the people watching now and also later are designers in the corporate world. And what kind of relationship do you have? What kind of design community is there in Omaha, and how is that a part of what you guys are doing at the museum?
So, we're actually headquarters to many large architectural firms. HDR is one of the largest architectural firms in the world is here. Colin, a couple other large, Holland Basham. So there is sort of a design, architectural sort of engineering community here. There's a group called Design Alliance Omaha that twice or three times a year brings in designers. They were bringing in a branding person from Canada in April. Of course, that didn't happen. In fact, the lecture takes place at the museum. Yeah. So there are ways in which we try to foster that. It is a small creative community in terms of the arts community compared to other places I have lived, but it is also connected. And then there is an architectural school in Lincoln, which is 45 minutes away. So there is a decent design community here. And as you may know, I mean, there's strong corporate partners. There's 4 or 5 Fortune 500 companies here. Yeah. 5. So there is this sort of business savviness to it.
Yeah, cool. There's a couple of people I'd love to have join us for a conversation, but it's always tricky. So I have to have their permission first. So Dana Marie, could I bring you into the conversation? Send me a note on chat, or Karen Pascoe, or Mary Ryder. Any one of you happy to do that? Just give me a little chat message.
I can tell you we have 2 slow art things that we do on a regular basis.
Yeah, go ahead.
We do a symphony, we do a partnership with the Chamber Symphony, where a few years ago they moved their concert series to the Joslyn, and it's 6 times a year, and they tie the concert series to a theme represented in a work in the permanent collection. And then before the symphony concert, we do 2 10-minute talks about that one work of art. And so there's an opportunity for visitors to look at one work of art for 10 minutes and hear about its ideas. And then the symphony concert plays off of that. And then once a month, we do a program called, I think it's called Lecture and Lunch, where either a curator or myself talks for one work of art about 20 or 25 minutes. Then it's followed by a lunch that is loosely based around that work of art as well.
Yeah, cool. Well, let me introduce to you and to everybody Dana Marie Lemmer. Dana, how are you?
See you.
It's so good to see you. Dana is the director and curator of the Wiregrass Museum of Art in Dothan, Alabama. And she was also one of the very first volunteers of Slow Art Day. She really played a huge role in getting Slow Art Day off the ground. We have our global operations leader and brought in a whole bunch of students and people from all over the world and put a bunch of time into it. So it was great to see you, Dana.
Yeah, same. That was a surprise. I didn't expect I camera.
Well, it's great to have you. Do you have any questions or comments to share with Jack as a fellow head of the museum?
Yeah. First, Phil, this has been such a great experience. I think probably like Jack, we're on a lot of calls every week with our museum colleagues, regional, local, and otherwise. And we're all dealing with very similar challenges right now, but it definitely sounds like you're looking at this as an opportunity to continue your mission and really to re-strategize and really with the community at the core. And that's something that I've been thinking a lot about. We're a very small regional museum, and so community engagement is so critical to relating to our public. And I've been thinking a lot about the challenges that museums are facing right now. And I think that those museums that have already been doing that work and building community goodwill, I think are going to have probably an easier time adapting and making some shifts if they've already been doing some of that work, which, it sounds like that's already happening in Omaha. So that's been really positive to hear today.
I also think that museums like yours and mine that have this strong community focus and have such buy-in, that we probably have a greater chance of coming out of this on the other side in a better place, because there's too many people who have too much invested, and whether it's be generations or just, a sense of their museum. And I think sometimes, you have a less of that when you live in a really big city, where if you go into a museum, it's everyone, which is great, but it's not such a community point of pride, community focus.
Yeah. I think when it's, museums that maybe haven't been doing a lot of that, really critical engagement with, their local community, I think it's just going to be harder because it's something that, they haven't done before. And I think we're all dealing with some financial struggles right now, regardless of, I guess, how your income is really received. But we have free admission as well. So we didn't see the same immediate hit to our income as a lot of museums did. Of course, there are other revenue streams that are being affected right now. But what we won't have to rebuild is the goodwill from our community. That's something that I think we can continue to leverage as we move forward and we make the decisions that we need to. So we're all rebuilding, I think, financially, but to have a really supportive community and a public that feels like it's their museum and they have that ownership is going to help us.
Yeah, I was on a call and I forget who it was. I've been on so many calls lately, but someone was talking about how now is the time to show to your constituents that you matter and that you're relevant and that you are there for them. Do not wait till after COVID, because by then, there's going to be other things that are going to matter more. So.
Yeah, no, it's really true. And Dana, just, you may know this, Jack, but I don't know if the viewers know sort of the history of the Wiregrass Museum in Dothan. Why was it started?
Well, the story is that Dothan was featured in a national publication as one of the worst places to live in the country. And the reason that was given was because there was no art museum. We had a group of local art lovers that got together and worked with the city to found our museum. And we're 30 years strong now, which is exciting. And we've always been free. That's always been a huge part of our mission, to make sure that everybody in the community has access.
Yeah.
Well, I have a good friend who just moved to Birmingham, so I'm going to go to Birmingham at some point, so I will pay a visit.
Jack, for reasons we're not entirely sure, two of our most important long-term volunteers and builders of Slow Art Day came from Alabama, Dana and Caroline Wingate in Birmingham. So there's an Alabama constituency that's very strong.
I can't wait to go.
It's really, thank you, Dana, for joining us for a moment now. It's great to see you and hear you. And Jack, I really, there's a few more questions that I just want to share.
Sure.
So one of our members is saying that a friend of mine worked at NOMA and is now at LUMA, encouraged him to buy local art. And he's wondering, how do you bridge for audiences the high cost of famous paintings with the work done by local artists? How do you promote local artists? How do you promote?
Yeah, it's an age-old question, and often museums like ours are sometimes criticized for not doing enough for the local artist community, and then we sort of have this balancing act. As I say to people, that I hope that you will buy art and support artists, but also not to let that entry point scare you, because you can buy works on paper and photographs and things by more blue chippy artists if you want. But I think as long as you're buying art and thinking about what you're buying, I think it's great. And I think that we, how we engage with local artists is we employ artists as teachers through our mentoring program. A lot of our artists serve as mentors to young artists. And I think that we have a role to do that. A few years ago, we did a juried exhibition of artists from across Nebraska with an outside curator from Houston named Bill Arning. We have on the docket to do that again. We think it's part of our role to highlight those folks who are working within our region and to give them a voice as well as to connect them with the public. So I think there's a role. As I always say, not everything that people buy needs to end up in a museum either. And I think those are different kind of collecting initiatives.
Yeah, that's great. One thought I have, by the way, that something I've been encouraging people to do pre-COVID, but who knows, maybe there's something more museums can do. But When I travel for business, I have a rule that if I go to a city, I have to visit at least one art museum while I'm there and spend some time, even though I'm there for meetings or whatever it is. And assuming travel starts again, I'm going to continue to recommend that. It's one of the best ways to see a city and understand that city is to go to its local museum. And it, you know, maybe there's a program we could create there, Jack, for travelers, or maybe there's a relationship with the Omaha airport.
Yeah, and I also think that, you know, every museum, there is going to be something local within it. You know, the idea is hopefully you don't go and see the same, I mean, as much as I love to see a Monet, to see the same Monet you've seen somewhere else, but there should always be a quirkiness to every art museum that is somewhat specific to who they are and where they are. And that can be kind of that great point of discovery too.
One final question, maybe. We'll see if more pop up, but what do you recommend people do now during the lockdown to maintain their relationship with art?
I encourage people to find some time to go online, wherever the communities they are, you know, whether the opera is doing a panel conversation or having someone give a concert, whether it's the symphony, whether it's the art museum. I think for those friends who are at home with young children, there are really great ways to engage those folks and yourself at the same time. I think if you have the capacity to support your local organizations, no matter how big or how small, I think those things matter. You know, I think we spend our time cooking, which is also a great creative outlook. But I think that people need to find ways. I did a staff email and I said to everyone, you know, you've got to find a way to get through this, whether it's walking or exercising or cooking or making art or whatever it is, but find that way to get away from the computer and Zoom and et cetera.
And have you learned anything about keeping your team moralized, your team working together? What's
constant communication. So I've been doing just little 60-second videos of just me sitting right here in this chair. You know, this is what I'm working on. This is, you know, and I've done that to our docents, to our guild, to our members. I think those things have been really sort of well received. I mean, I used to meet with my senior team once a week. Now we meet twice a week. I think it's that more constant connection.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Jack, it's just what a pleasure to spend time with you, to get to know you better. Thank you for the work you've done there, whether the free admission policies, which I'm a huge fan of. I'm so glad you did that. Plus the diversification of the art you have, the exhibitions, the staff, the team, the community outreach. It's really remarkable. I can't wait till we come back to Omaha.
I can't wait.
Have a glass of wine with you, spend some time in the galleries. I really appreciate everything you're doing for that city and for the country as a whole. You know, art is absolutely fundamental, and it doesn't need any other justification, although there are many other benefits for sure. But just to spend time looking, and thank you for all you do for the art world and for all of us.
Well, I thank you for the invitation to join you all remotely, and I look forward to having an opportunity at some point to welcome you all to Omaha again and to the Joslyn Art Museum. So thank you. All
right, excellent. Thank you all for being here today, and we'll give you the gift of time for a few minutes before your next Zoom meeting. I'm sure you have, because that's what we're all doing all day long. So what a treat to have this break with you, Jack. So good luck, and we'll see you soon. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.